Strange Shadows, a Carcash and Smith podcast.
Paul Tregardas found the milky crystal in a litter of oddments from many lands and eras. He had entered the shop of the curio dealer through an aimless impulse, with no particular object in mind, other than the idle distraction of eyeing and fingering a miscellany of far-gathered things. Looking desultorily about, his attention had been drawn by a dull glimmering on one of the tables, and he had extricated the queer orb-like stone from its shadowy, crowded position between an ugly little Aztec idol, the fossil egg of a dinornis, and an obscene fetish of black wood from the Niger. The thing was about the size of a small orange, and was slightly flattened at the ends, like a planet at its poles. It puzzled Tregardas, for it was not like an ordinary crystal, being cloudy and changeable, with an intermittent glow at its heart, as if it were alternately illumined and darkened from within. Holding it to the wintry window, he studied it for a while without being able to determine the secret of this singular and regular alternation. His puzzlement was soon complicated by a dawning sense of vague and irrecognizable familiarity, as if he had seen the thing before under circumstances that were now wholly forgotten.
Greetings friends, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 18 of Strange Shadows, the Clark Ashton Smith podcast. The voice you just heard was Matthew Wood, reading the opening of today's story. I am one of your hosts, Rob Hoyton.
And I'm the other one, Tim Mendes. And Matthew Wood from Edwyrdian Tales recently joined us over on the IBC, along with improv poet and comedian CJ Hooper, and we were looking at performing Lovecraft. And it was a mightily good conversation, wasn't it, sir?
It was a lot of fun. Yeah, they both perform spoken word in slightly different ways. CJ is a stand-up comedian and improvised poetry as well, which is very, very good. And Edwyrdian Tales is, well, Matthew performs classic ghost stories and is currently on tour with his Christmas Ghost Stories show. We'll put a link in the show notes below. If he's in your area, do go and see him. It's very, very good.
Indeed, yeah, I can attest to that because both of them performed at this year's Innsmouth After Dark for the Innsmouth Literary Festival, and they both went down an absolute storm. Yes, and like we say, he just read the opening paragraph of today's story, and today we're looking at an absolute Smithian classic, in my humble opinion. We're looking at Ubbo-Sathla.
Nice, yeah, one of his great mythos pieces, isn't it?
Indeed, or as Robert M. Price calls it, Smithos. I can't help rolling my eyes at that pun.
Yes, well, you know me and puns.
Oh, I do, only too well.
And I think in this one, as I mentioned when we were chatting before, to me this really combines Lovecraft and Howard and Smith. It's like a little bit of all three for me in this story.
Yeah, I think that's why it really appeals to me as well. I mean, it is one of the most mythosy things Smith ever did. But definitely, really. But it's interesting how good this piece is, considering Smith's state of mind at the time he wrote it. Because I've got a letter here. We're going into Eccentric Impractical Devils, the letters of August Derleth and Clark Ashton Smith, to a letter dated February the 16th, 1932. And Clark Ashton Smith writes, "He hasn't reported on the last weirds as yet. I have done a brief fantasy, Ubbo-Sathla, for submission to write. I don't know whether it's any good or not, since I'm a bit fagged mentally, and everything seems more or less rotten to me. Confinement indoors gets my goat, and I'll welcome some open weather when I can work out in the fresh air." So yeah, it seems like he was having one of his periods of ill health at this time.
Right, yeah. But still, nonetheless, he managed to turn this out, and I think, as we say, even Smith, when he's in first gear, is still top tier compared to a lot of other writers, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, I class this, like, really highly. among Smith's work. And for him to not be in a good state of mind when he wrote it is astonishing to me, really, because this is like most other authors firing on all cylinders.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's a bit of an odd tale because nothing much really happens, does it? There's no action in it, or action, as him and Howard would say. And yet it's, well, I think again we've got the world building on a grand scale here, and it raises a lot of interesting points and issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll start with our favourite words. Now, there were some really nice ones in here, most of which I think were covered before, but there were certainly one or two new ones as well. And I'm going to start with one of those, dinornis.
Ah, nice.
So obviously dinosaur comes to mind, and that's pretty much where we are, because it's an extinct bird of the moa family. These things were about 12 foot tall, apparently.
Bloody hell.
Think of a giant ostrich and you're pretty much there, I think.
That's terrifying. Imagine that bearing down on you.
I was going to say, imagine the drumstick you get off of that. But, you know.
Oh, God. Feed a family of 5 for a week.
Wouldn't get that in a bucket, would you?
Yeah, my first one, I don't know if we've had it before or not, but I'm going with it because I love it. It's vermiculated.
Oh, yes.
Yes, indeed. It means, like, on the front cover of a book, when you get those dense, irregular lines that look like worm trails, that's vermiculated. Yeah, it basically means trails left in things resembling the tracks made by worms.
I think, have we ever had a Smith story that doesn't have a worm reference in it somewhere, or a serpent reference? It's hard to think of one that hasn't, isn't it?
Yeah, he does like his worms and his ophidian things, doesn't he? Definitely.
Yeah, well, both of which we get in this, right, as we'll see later on.
Yeah.
My next choice is a word that I'd heard a lot, and it's one of those I kind of thought I knew what it meant, but I thought I'd check anyway. Recherche. Obviously French origin, and it kind of has a couple of meanings. Generally it means rare or exotic, but it can also mean refined, usually in a sort of put down type of way. Oh yeah, that's way too refined for someone of your tastes. Seems to be used in that context quite a lot.
Yeah, I seem to remember it in, I think, was it Only Fools and Horses? I think Del Boy says, "Don't be some bloody recherche, robbers."
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Petit pois.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right, next up, I'm going with a word that I knew what it was. I've known all my life what it was. Basically, it's a metamorphic rock, a coarse-grained metamorphic rock. But what I didn't know, I've never known how you actually pronounce the damn thing.
Right.
And it's spelt Gneis, and it's pronounced nice.
Nice.
Yeah, there you go. I just saw it. I was like, you know what? I'm actually going to figure out how it's pronounced for the first time ever.
Yeah, because I've always read that as Gneis or Gneis or Gneis or something like that. Now that must be really confusing. If an archaeologist goes to you, that rock's nice, you say, oh, thanks. Yeah. No, it's nice. Yeah.
It's a nice bit of nice. Maybe that's what the Stranglers were singing about. Nice and nice.
Nice and nice. Speaking of which, I did fly to Nice recently, but I'll mention that at the end. My little jaunt into Averoigne. But
excellent.
Because someone said to me, "How was Nice?" And of course, the obvious answer is, "Oh, yeah, it was nice."
Yeah, of course. It's so nice in Nice. Yeah.
My next word, again, is something I knew what it meant, but I do like this word, demiurge. The creator of the world. And we could go into a big sidetrack here about Gnosticism and everything else, but basically the demiurge is the being that created the world, not necessarily God, who could potentially be above the being who created the world, but that's the short meaning.
Nice. Well, I'm actually quite glad you brought that up, because that's a rabbit hole I wanted to leap down, because there's a Michael Shea story called Demiurge.
Yes, there is.
About a big old protoplasmic monster. Is it Ubbo?
Well,
very possibly, or one of Ubbo's spawn or something like that. So there, a great story as well. Right, my next one is one, again, he's one of those that I've always inferred what it meant, but I wanted to learn the actual real meaning. It's inveigle. It means to persuade through deception or flattery.
Nice. That's I don't know, for some reason that puts me in mind of Farford and the Grey Mouser, because we covered Bizarre of the Bizarre, didn't we, on IBC recently. The Mouser particularly is a person who inveigles his way in, isn't he?
Yes, absolutely.
Nice word. My final choice, I think we may have had this one before, probably in one of the Venus stories, is calamite, which is a swamp plant. Now, a plant, you think, what's that sort of waist height? Maybe it comes up above your head, fern-like. No. These were around in the Carboniferous era and grew to 60 feet high. And Carboniferous is the clue here, because calamites are one source of coal. There must have been a bloody lot of them, mustn't there?
Oh, God, yeah. Well, sticking with that, and again, I think we may have had this one, probably again, in one of the Venus stories. It's cicads, which is a tree with a cylindrical trunk that bears seeds.
Very nice. Again, we're getting our Smith botanical quota in. I don't know if has anyone ever done, not a word count as such, but a theme count would be interesting. To see how many stories are vermicular, how many are botanical, and a little bit of geology in there as well, isn't there, at times?
That's an interesting idea. What I'd like to see is the Clark Ashton Smith gardening book. That's what I'd like to see.
Well, it ties in nicely with what Niels was telling us, right, about the flora and fauna in California, because we had no idea, because we're from Britain.
Yeah, exactly.
That there were these real exotic plants there, and obviously he was drawing on local knowledge with the volcanic rock and all that stuff as well.
Yeah. Poddy fronds.
My favourite actor. Second only to Musty Tomes.
Oh, Musty Tomes, what a hero.
Now, I'm going to take a wild guess here, a stab in the dark. I'm going to guess that this was sent to Weird Tales, and I'm going to guess that at first, at least, Wright turned it down.
Ding, 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 we have a winner.
To be fair, it's a low bar, isn't it, that one?
Yeah, well, Ubbo-Sathla was completed on February the 15th, 1932, and yes, he subbed it to Weird Tales, and it was pretty much instantly rejected. Now, the rejection letter doesn't survive, but Smith did remark to Lovecraft that he seemed to think that it would be over the heads of his clientele. Again, Wright with a really low estimation of the intelligence of his reader base.
Oh, it's just bizarre, isn't it? Because there's you can say there's reference to past ages of Earth and everything else, but you don't have to know your Pleistocene from your Miocene from your Plasticine, do you, to enjoy the story?
Yeah, because he wrote here to Lovecraft, the letter's undated, but it's believed to be mid-March 1932. It says, Wright must have rejected Ubbo-Sathla because it didn't remind him of anything that had ever made a hit with his readers. I can't see myself that it's especially difficult or highbrow. Where Wright errs is in playing safe when he can't find a precedent for some particular tale, a method of selection that is none too favourable to originality. It will be interesting to see what he says to the Double Shadow, a tale that I am inclined, though I may be wrong, to rate above Ubbo-Sathla. Well, we'll get onto that next time, won't we?
Yes, that's our next story, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, Smith took it away and did some revisions, which probably explains why this one, again, doesn't have a lot of that very Baroque language, does it?
No, it's pretty straightforward, yeah.
Well, this time he did actually accept it, and he wrote to OneDrive that he thought the reason that it was accepted was because, and I quote, Lovecraft had raked him over about the rejection.
Oh, nice. How he steps in.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was published in the July 1933 issue of Weird Tales. Now, this is an issue of Weird Tales that I really want to actually get a copy of, because it's like the bumper mythos edition sort of thing, because it also contains Lovecraft's Dreams in the Witch House, and also Lovecraft and Hazel Heald's story, The The Horror in the Museum,
Wow.
which is one of my favourites of Lovecraft's revision stories. I really like that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and all three of these stories actually contained references to the Book of Ebon. So that's a nice little bit of serendipity, isn't it?
Well, this is the reason why people started writing in and asking if these were real, right? You've got these disparate authors mentioning the same things. It's building this. It's world building, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Well, that brings me neatly to this thing that I was going to bring up at some point, because there was a lot of questions from fans, and Smith responded to one such query from Charles D. Hornig, David Lasser's successor at Wonder Stories, and who was also editor of The Fantasy Fan. And Smith wrote in, I think we've read this out before in one of our bonus episodes. Necronomicon, Book of Ibon, etc., I am sorry to say, are all fictitious. Lovecraft invented the first, I the second. It's really too bad they don't exist as objective, bona fide compilations of the elder and darker lore. I've been trying to remedy this in some small measure by cooking up a whole chapter of Ibon. It's still unfinished. I am now entitling it The Coming of the White Worm. Another one of my favourites.
Yes. And the same setting. Well, at least, we can get onto settings in a moment.
Now, Lynn Carter did actually later pick up that baton and try to write it, the Book of Ibon.
Right.
He wrote a lot of it, but he passed away before he completed it. And one of the bits in that was actually the unbegotten source and things like that. So, yeah, it was actually all of those bits, along with all the Smith stuff and loads of other writers using the Book of Ibon, was released as Chaosium's Book of Ibon. It's part of their cycle series of books. It's a really chunky tome. It's a good one.
I don't think I have that one.
It's a really good one.
For that. I mean, they're hugely expensive now, right? If you see them on eBay or whatever.
The problem. Yeah, it's very similar to the one they did on the Necronomicon.
Yeah, I have that one. Yeah.
Now, this is actually quite funny. I didn't know this until reading this in the back in the appendices of the book we're going from, because I've read that letter before and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't realise that Hornig inadvertently published the letter in the November 1933 issue. He wasn't supposed to publish it. It was supposed to be a personal letter. And Smith remarked in a postcard to Lovecraft, I was a little vexed by Brother Hornig's scoop in utilising my letter about Ibon, etc. He asked me where and how the books could be obtained, and I didn't think to stipulate that the answer was for his private information. Dumb of me, I'll admit. However, as you say, the hoax might easily go too far. How funny is that? But it's the fact that that's actually Hornig who's asking him about it, because he's been asked and he probably thinks they're real as well.
Well, I mean, I think there is a letter from Robert E. Howard as well talking about this, and he says to, I think it was to Lovecraft, or you fooled me. I thought, this was real as well. So, and there's a quote from Lovecraft along the lines of, if you're going to write weird fiction, the setting has to be very real. So he actually uses the word hoax. It's like setting up a hoax. You have to make it as real as possible, so people will believe in this stuff, So maybe that'd be an interesting subject to look at sometime. And we can tie that in a little bit with what we're going to be talking about later on today with the serpent people, of course. that's a slight tangent, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I like the fact that basically people were actually putting entries in the library and in the British Museum and things like that, in entries for the Necronomicon, and it's been checked out, sort of thing,
And never came back.
Never came back.
Or it makes its own way back, it just reappears.
Yeah. Now, so the origin of Ubbo-Sathla, there was a note Smith wrote where he basically laid out the idea of it. Now, Douglas A. Anderson suggests that it may have been influenced by Leonard Klein's novel The Dark Chamber from 1927. But as of December 33, Smith had not read it. Now, I've never even heard of it.
No, I'm not familiar with that.
No, it seems to be one that needs to go on my list. But basically, the Scott Connors and Ron Hilger suggest that it was almost through osmosis, because it's believed that Wandrei's story, The Lives of Alfred Kramer, was inspired by that novel. And he said in a letter to Wandrei about Ubbo-Sathla that the story's ideation may remind you a little of your own tale.
Yes, because we know Smith had read this, right, previous to beginning this story. Yeah.
Read it, critiqued it, ripped Donald Wandrei apart about it.
Well, yeah, because he actually wrote to Wandrei. Well, he mentions this in a letter to August Derleth. I criticised Alfred Kramer pretty heavily myself, advising Wandrei to simplify the yarn and work in some sort of connecting thread among the ancestral incidents, perhaps a pursuing menace, which Kramer is finally forced to confront in its primordial lair as he goes back on the trail of memory. There seems to be a lack of point and significance as the tale stands, though the underlying notion is certainly a fine one. That's August 1931.
Nice. Well, that was actually a response to a letter that I have here from August Derleth to Smith on the 24th of August 31. August Derleth writes, "When I write words of praise, I restrict myself usually to saying, I like it or it's good. But when I give constructive criticism, I am usually too blunt about it. Recently, Wandrei sent me a new story, The Lives of Alfred Kramer, which, because he had not been writing for a long time, was very rusty and creaked a good deal. A reincarnation story, good in skeleton, but embodying an ancestor or previous incarnation present at Shakespeare's success, the assassination of Heliogabalus, crucifixion of Christ, destruction of Pompeii, that's stretching the thing to artificiality and flimsy device. And I told him so. Especially was it bad because, with the exception of the Heliogabalus episode, there was nothing to connect with a detail in the present life."
Right. He does mention this to Lovecraft as well. It's a little more forgiving, perhaps, when he's speaking to Lovecraft about the story. He says, "The story is excellent with a strong ending, but I agree with you that it could be simplified to advantage." And again, he brings up that idea of having more unity in the incidents and tying them in with the modern day. I imagine from what is written there, Lovecraft agreed with that idea as well. So it's interesting. We see the genesis of stories in other stories. And I wonder if there's an element of, oh, that's a good idea, but he didn't really do it right. I think I'm going to have a go at that.
Oh, yeah, a bit of one-upmanship, very possibly.
Well, yeah, I don't even know if it would be one-upmanship as such, or just, I think that could be done a bit better, you know?
Differently, yeah.
Yeah, almost like an enthusiasm. Because when they like a story, they don't try and copy it, do they? Like, we don't see Smith do it trying to shadow over Innsmouth, for example.
Or Dreams in the Witch House, or
it's almost like, he's done that. Lovecraft or Wandrei or Bloch, whoever has done that. Yeah, that's finished. You know, I just wonder if that was their approach with this.
That is very possible.
So at the start we heard Matthew reading the opening of the story, but it isn't actually the opening paragraph, because I wanted to read this bit out myself. Really,
mad fool!
I know, just as a chance to say these great names. Also, because if you were in any doubt as to whether this was a mythos tale or not, this little opening really sets the scene. And how great it must have been to then read those other two stories in the same issue and get all these names recurring, but spelt slightly differently.
Yes.
Which I think just adds to the verisimilitude, doesn't it? It's a very nice touch. So this is a quote from the Book of Eibon that opens Ubbo-Sathla. "For Ubbo-Sathla is the source and the end. Before the coming of Xothaqua or Yog-Sothoth or Cthulhu from the stars, Ubbo-Sathla dwelt in the steaming fens of the new-made earth, a mass without head or members, spawning the grey formless efts of the prime and the grisly prototypes of terrene life. And all earthly life, it is told, shall go back at last through the great circle of time to Ubbo-Sathla."
Nice. Yeah, I love that little phrase, but I can't help thinking the steaming fens. The Norfolk Broads, isn't it?
I used to live in the steaming fens for a while.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, you must have seen that then, because I mean, I remember in the summer going on holiday in like Norfolk and Suffolk and thing on the Broads and all that, and you're walking out in the morning and you do get that steam coming off them.
Oh yeah.
And it is eerie, isn't it?
It's quite striking landscape. Yeah, funny enough, I was talking about this the other day to someone who lived out in the fens for a while as well. And about this time of year, it can be incredibly bleak. But the sunrises and the sunsets are quite spectacular. You talk about the sky on fire, that's really the effect you get. But the other thing this reminds me of, and going back to that carboniferous 60-foot tall plant, as a kid having those dinosaur books, to go back to dinornis, and you had Archaeopteryx and Stegosaurus, all in these incredible lush landscapes. Some great illustrations in those old books.
I used to love them. It's a sort of an art style you don't see too often these days as well.
Yeah, it was a very particular style, was it? I can really picture it in my mind, Now, for all our talk of ancient times, which we will be getting into, the prehistory and pre-prehistory, the setting for this story is modern-day London, or at least London of the 1930s. But it very quickly switches back to Hyperborea. So, in effect, would you call this one of the Hyperborean tales?
I would, yeah. I would. It's almost like a coda to the Hyperborea cycle, isn't it, in my mind? Because it's set afterwards. It's almost like it's like some weird psychic archaeology in a way.
Oh, psychic archaeology, that's good. I bet you can study that at the Miskatonic.
Oh, I bet you can. Yeah.
Has anyone ever put the Miskatonic on University Challenge?
Oh man,
Miskatonic studying psychic archaeology. Professor
nice.
Randolph Carter, the Miskatonic. Now there's a sketch.
Oh yeah. Well, I remember that when Red Dwarf had some anniversary, they did Universe Challenge.
Oh,
and they had the cast of Red Dwarf versus fans.
Wow.
And that was hilarious. That was really funny.
So was that like questions about the show kind of thing?
Yeah.
Was it? Like,
yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it was really good fun. Yeah.
Mind you, the best University Challenge sketch is the young ones, right?
Oh,
that's
quick.
classic. Sorry, Bambi.
Rah, rah, rah. We're going to smash the oiks.
So, yes, we're in 1930s London. And as we find out at the beginning there, our protagonist is one Paul Tregardice, which is another one of those Cornish type names that Smith seems quite fond of. And this is one of those classic antique shop type openings, right? We can go back to the Bazaar of the Bizarre that we mentioned earlier, or any number of Amicus films with Peter Cushing as the shop owner. It's an odd object in a curio shop that's going to lead to trouble.
Yeah, a lot of Stephen King short stories start with that, really.
And I think, as you said at the start, the language in this is not particularly Baroque, at least by Smithian standards, but there's a couple of really nice phrases. This one stood out for me. Holding it to the wintry window. The wintry window, you've got a nice alliteration there. And again, that strikes up a very vivid image. Yeah,
when you get that sort of frosting in the corners. It always brings to mind Christmas, doesn't it, when you get that? Christmas as a kid, when you got them the patches of condensation in the corners and things. Yeah.
There you go, it's official. Ubbo-Sathla is a Christmas story, a bit like Die Hard.
Nice.
That's a running argument in my house, but we won't go into that.
But it is. Of course it is.
And there's another little phrase I like here, because he asks the shop owner about this. And this man has an air of dusty antiquity, and he gives the impression of being lost to commercial considerations in some web of Kabbalistic reverie. Kabbalistic reverie, that was a nice phrase as well.
That's a band name.
Yes. Yep. And all this guy can tell him is it's very old, and a geologist found it in Greenland beneath glacial ice in the Miocene strata. So just in case you're wondering how old that makes this, well, somewhere between 5 to 23 million years ago. That was the time of the Miocene era, and it was actually before the Pliocene era. And I thought, from the story point of view, the interesting thing with the Miocene is this is the age when the first apes evolved. So this must be the setting for Hyperborea, and Greenland, as we'll find out later on, it all sort of fits together, right?
Yeah, definitely. And because I've always wondered, because when you got those early apes and things like that, because Smith always also had the Vormi,
Yes.
those ape-like Sasquatchy kind of guys with the umber fur. So I like that kind of thing, because it kind of gives it an air of, an air of reality to it in a way.
Yeah, yeah.
That they might have been a forgotten offshoot.
And we get mention of Thule here. We're going to go into that a little bit later on. But straight away, we've got this setting up of a particular world history. And something, of course, that at the time, we're just sort of post-Blavatsky. We've got that whole thing going on. We've got actually in the 1920s, possibly the 1930s, the setting up of the Thule Society in what was to become Nazi Germany. Yeah. So there's all this lost world stuff floating around. The theory of evolution is still relatively new, right? Darwin wasn't that long before this.
No.
So it's how writers like Lovecraft and Smith take all this current, well, we can call it science or pseudoscience, I suppose, and weave it into their stories. It's a very masterful way.
Yeah, it's a very interesting stuff. It's like the Thule Society is one of the big things that the Wolfenstein games were based around. The SS Paranormal Division and all that. So, yeah. So that kicked off in a big way in the 40s, didn't it? The Thule Society.
Yeah, they were really, I think, one of the sources of the idea. Well, their idea was that Aryans originated in Thule in the north in Greenland. And
that's it.
It was largely based on a book, the name of which escapes me at the moment, that was later found out to be a complete hoax. There's that word again. So there's a running theme in this, in that all these theories are really found to be hoaxes, yet, look at the trouble a bloody hoax can cause. I mean...
Oh, God, yeah. Well, it's like, to a lesser degree, look at the amount of fuss kicked up by the Simon Necronomicon and things like that. Because, and what was the other one by Anonymous? I can't remember the name of it. Supposed occult texts, and people, the satanic panic went absolutely crazy about it, didn't it? Ban this and ban that.
Yeah.
But it was all just a lot of cobblers,
Yeah, as most of it generally turns out to be, it seems.
Yeah.
But speaking of books, we do get the mention here. Well, it's in that opening paragraph, of course, and we get mention again here of the Book of Eibon. And I believe this is the first mention by Smith of the Book of Eibon. Obviously, we've seen Eibon before, the author, in The Door to Saturn and one or two other stories. One of Smith's very few recurring characters. And people often say where Randolph Carter was Lovecraft, Eibon was Smith. A magician, a poet, a sculptor.
Yeah.
And not averse to the odd bit of alien rumpy-pumpy, perhaps.
There you go. You can tick that one off on your bingo card.
Bingo. Thank you, Niels. So the Book of Eibon, of course, as with all of these, Lovecraft and Howard and many others picked it up and ran with it. Also known as the Liber Ivonis, the Latin version, or the French version, the Livre d'Eibon, which was translated by Gaspard du Nord of Averoigne, of course, where else?
Nice.
It has appeared in various other things as well. I didn't know this. I didn't remember this. It was in Fulci's The Beyond in 1981.
Yeah.
And apparently it also crops up in Doctor Who. So there's your starter for 10, sir.
I know it crops up in the Virgin New Adventures, in the novels and things like that.
There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
I knew you'd know.
Yeah, it crops up a couple of times. Yog-Sothoth appears in them and things like that, in like Time Worm and All-Consuming Fire. Because it's believed that Yog-Sothoth is the great intelligence that was in the Web of Fear.
Ah, of course. Was that the one with the house? What was the one with the house? There's the TV one with the big tentacles over the house.
Oh, that's the Seat of Doom.
Right.
Yeah, that was the one that was basically a riff on The Thing.
Ah, right.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm thinking of the Weather Fear, which was the Yetis in the underground. The
Ah,
controlling intelligence is believed to be Yog-Sothoth, spheres, and
oh, of course, yeah, the Silver
yeah,
Sphere, wasn't it? Yeah.
yeah.
So the Yetis could have been Vormis as well, couldn't they?
Oh, they
Really?
could. Yeah,
Ah,
yeah. There you go.
it all ties together.
It does.
And we get actually a fair bit of detail from Smith here about the Book of Ebon. The remote fabulous original was supposed to have been the work of a great Hyperborean wizard from whom it had taken its name. It was a collection of dark and baleful myths, of liturgies, rituals and incantations, both evil and esoteric. Not without shudders, in the course of the studies that the average person would have considered more than singular, Trigardis had collated the French volume with the frightful Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul al-Azrad. He had found many correspondences of the blackest and most appalling significance, together with much forbidden data that was either unknown to the Arab or omitted by him or by his translators.
Yeah, this is kind of the most Smith has referenced other mythos entities, isn't it? Because I mean, we've had the odd reference here and there, like in Return of the Sorcerer and things like that. But yeah, we're getting this is. I think this is probably the closest he gets to a Derlethian shopping list, isn't it?
It is really.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I think, especially when we get the later on stuff, this is that combination of Lovecraft and Howard in a through a Smithian lens. Absolutely. And it's nice that he's dropping the Necronomicon here from his old buddy. It's this cross referencing which we talk about a lot, of course, and something that continues to this day. I mean, certainly Robert Bloch used the Book of Ibon. I'm sure many other authors have since as well. Derleth must have mentioned it.
Yeah, I have.
Yes.
Several times.
So this chap, Trigardis, is obviously no amateur dabbler, is he? Is very serious about his investigations. And is he like well, you said psychic archaeology. That seems to be kind of his field, doesn't it? Because it seems to go beyond just occultism.
Yeah, it's interesting because there is, along with the Wandrai story, which is basically a guy, going through the reincarnations and things like that. But this reminds me quite a bit of Belknap Long's Hounds of Tindalos.
Yes, yeah.
It's that on the House of the Borderlands as well. House on the Borderlands.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
That sort of that long section in the middle where he basically just rushes through time, his consciousness and all that.
Yeah, that's your cosmic element, isn't it?
Yeah.
And in each of those 4 cases, it's a different mechanism, right?
Yes.
Because I think in the Wandrai story, it's a machine.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Tindalos is the drug.
Yep.
Lao. Is it Lao? I
Lao.
think it was called.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the crystal.
Yeah.
And House in the Borderland, I think it was just him sitting in the house, wasn't it?
It was a delirium.
Yeah.
It was kind of delirium, wasn't it? And the baleful influence of the house. So kind of like a ley line, I sort of interpreted it.
Yeah, the place was sitting on a sort of portal, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Or this weird confluence of things. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. So interesting, a similar theme, but 4 different mechanisms.
Yeah.
And this is where we get more of our world building and the history of this crystal, really. And we get the name of that great wizard, Zon Mezamalech, from Mu-Thulan. And I like this. It describes it in the Book of Ibon. It's just a brief, casual reference.
Nice.
I want to see how that's written. It's to summon up Yog-Sothoth, you shall da 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 da. Oh, and there was this guy called Zon Mezalmek in Muthilan, and he had a crystal.
Yeah, you can see stuff through it. Yeah. Anyway, moving on to Azathoth.
So Muthilan, of course, we've got really a combination of 2 names there. We've got Mu, the lost continent. The idea or the theory for that came about from a chap called Augustus Le Plongeon, who was a Victorian antiquarian. And it was his explanation for Atlantis. Basically, Mu was his Atlantis, set in the Atlantic. But not long after, it was taken up by a guy called James Churchyard, who put it into the name Lemuria, which he placed in the Pacific. So now we're into Easter Island and those various other places in the Pacific that we shall not mention or go to.
Penapi, isn't it? Where nearest one to relay.
Yeah, something, was it 33 degrees or 43? I should know that off by heart, shouldn't I? Yeah. And Thule, we've already mentioned. Well, Ultima Thule was the Roman and Greek name for Greenland, because Thule was seen as the furthest north region where the sea and the sky merge, basically. So I suppose you can't get much further north than Greenland before you hit the ice, can you?
Yeah, that's interesting. I seem to. Wasn't Ultima Thule the name of a thrash metal band in the 80s as well?
Must have been.
Pretty sure it was.
Sure,
yeah,
sure.
I'm sure one of our listeners might be able to fill me in on that.
I wonder how many umlauts they put into that. Ultima Thule.
Yeah, it has to be done.
Then again, with the Thule Society and all that, as we mentioned, that's got very dodgy connotations these days. So
yeah,
maybe not. And we also get a mention of Thule in Edgar Allan Poe's poem Dreamland, written in 1844, which begins with the following stanza: "By a route obscure and lonely, haunted by ill angels only, where an eidolon named Night on a black throne reigns upright. I've reached these lands but newly, from an ultimate dim Thule, from a wild weird clime that lieth sublime, out of space, out of time." So that's a little Smith reference in itself, isn't it? Out of space, out of time.
Yeah, I love it. That might be the most goth thing I've ever heard in my life. I love that. That's brilliant. The dark eidolon of night and the black throne, and yeah. He knew what he's doing, old Poe, didn't he?
Oh yeah. It is the root, isn't he, of so much of this stuff.
Oh God, yeah.
A wild, weird climb that lieth sublime, out of space, out of time. Marvellous stuff.
Brilliant stuff.
Yeah, so this is Smith world building, or history building, really. And again, it's nice that when he does this, he draws in Lovecraft and Howard's worlds as well. So it's very easy to put all these characters from all their stories together in the same universe, really. And I do see this does arise on sort of social media every now and again. Is Conan in the same universe as Cthulhu?
Yeah.
Well, Cthulhu is in every universe, so there is that, along with Yog-Sothoth and everything else. But the answer is yes.
Of course
they all exist in the same universe.
No, of course they do. Yeah. Well, which Conan story is it where it's actually like a regression? Similar to this is a chap.
People of the Black Circle.
That's it. Because doesn't that actually have direct mentions of Cthulhu in it? There's one of them that does.
Cthulhu is mentioned in at least one of the Conan stories. Yeah. But as we'll see later on when we get into that regression, it's very, very similar to what happens in the People of the Black Circle.
Right.
Very similar idea, which they were all drawing on. You've already mentioned the Hounds of Tindalos. So this was a common theme amongst these writers as well.
Of course. Yeah. I wonder if that actually goes from the Victorian obsession with reincarnation, because it was a huge thing, wasn't it, in the Victorian era when they would have been kids and whatever, because there was the society, reincarnation society, and seances and table tipping and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, that huge surge in interest in spiritualism and the occult in general, because we've already mentioned Blavatsky, but of course you've got the whole raft of them, Machen, Crowley, all the Mathers, all these people are floating around at that time. Yeah. Yet we still get this interesting little comment here. Tregardius smiled at himself with inward irony for even conceiving the absurd notion. Such things did not occur, at least not in present-day London, and in all likelihood the Book of Eibon was sheer superstitious fantasy. So although he's into all this stuff and studying it, it doesn't really seem like he believes it.
Yeah, well, I guess you had those collectors of so-called occult things and magical stuff, but they used to collect them, but they didn't believe in any of it. They'd just have it to have it, It's like the old Victorian practice of pineapples, taking pineapples to parties just to say you've got a pineapple because it was exotic. It was the same thing with these magical artifacts, and there was all like people trying to steal bones of saints and all that kind of stuff, wasn't it? There was a huge black market of it. So maybe that's what this guy's into.
And the whole mummy thing, right? Mummy unwrapping parties.
Mummy
and all
parties.
That when the British Empire was plundering the world of its ancient treasures, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Nonetheless, he takes the crystal home, sits it on the table, and starts reading from his Book of Averoigne. I think it's the French version he has, so he's translating from the archaic French as he read. So he's obviously a learned guy, a scholar. This wizard, who was mighty among sorcerers, had found a cloudy stone, orb-like and somewhat flattened at the ends, in which he could behold many visions of the terrene past, even to the earth's beginning, when Ubbo-Sathla, the unbegotten source, lay vast and swollen and yeasty amid the vapouring slime. Ooh.
Yeah, I know. I love that line. Yeah, vast, swollen, and yeasty amid the vapouring slime.
I'm not even going to go there.
No, but it's it's there, isn't it?
Yeasty, especially because there's that sort of implication of like fermenting or changing or evolving or changing into something else. It's a natural process, right? It's.
But also, if you think about it, there's something very anatomical about it in a way. You don't want me to go there, but I'm going to go there because obviously Ubbo-Sathla, the unbegotten source, is it's almost like a mother of the world kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeasty brings to mind, sort of yeast infections, that kind of business. Don't know. I don't know. There's a lot of implications in them words there that are just a bit grim.
Yeah, it's sort of how can I phrase this delicately? It's life growing in reproductive areas.
Yes.
Does that work? Yeah.
Yeah. That's precisely it. Yeah.
It's life, Jim, but not as we'd like it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess that's the reference. That's the casual reference we have to it in the Book of Averoigne. This then draws his attention back to the crystal, and that's when he makes the second mistake. The first mistake was taking it home. The second mistake is now sitting there and looking into its depths.
Mm. Yeah, which actually brought to mind the Lamp of Alhazred. It's a very similar thing happens in that, doesn't it? That's another one with the same kind of setup.
Yeah. Minute by minute he sat and watched the alternate glimmering and fading of the mysterious light in the heart of the crystal. By imperceptible degrees there stole upon him a sense of dreamlike duality, both in respect to his person and his surroundings. He was still Paul Treguardis, and yet he was someone else. The room was his London apartment, and a chamber in some foreign but well-known place, and in both milieus he peered steadfastly into the same crystal. He knew that he was Zon Mezamelech, a sorcerer of Muthulan, and a student of all lore anterior to his own epoch. Now, I don't know if it's clear in this, I suppose that's open to speculation. Is he a distant reincarnation of Zon? Or is it just a sort of a psychic link that is established between the two of them?
Mm.
Or is it just that we are all descendants of Ubbo-Sathla, so we've all got that connection?
Yeah, I don't know. I would probably go with the latter, really. But that's an interesting point. Well, again, I like the fact that it's not explicitly told to us why. It gets the brain going, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But under that paragraph, we get actually a confirmation of what because we were saying, is he a bit of a dabbler, that kind of thing? And it sounds like, yes, he is. Wise with dreadful secrets that were not known to Paul Treguardis, amateur of anthropology and the occult sciences in latter-day London. He sought by means of the milky crystal to attain an even older and more fearful knowledge. So, he was basically a dilettante.
Yes. Which I guess compared to a Hyperborean wizard, anyone would be in the modern day, because you don't have those resources. Really.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that Zon the knowledge he's got is not enough. He's still looking back to an earlier time. So we get that double. Tregarda's looking back to see Zon looking back to, well, we know where it ends up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the Russian dolls, isn't it? It's
yeah, it's like Fractal, isn't it?
Yeah, or Umma Gumma, the Pink Floyd album cover.
And this is where we get a description of these stone tablets, or well, they're ultra-stellar stone. Through the crystal, Zon Mezamalek had dreamt to recover the wisdom of the gods who died before the earth was born. They had passed to the lightless void, leaving their lore inscribed upon tablets of ultrastellar stone, and the tablets were guarded in the primal mire by the formless, idiotic demiurge Ubbo-Sathla. So his motivation here is to get back and get these tablets, and they're going to reveal the secrets of the gods for him. Well, the dead gods. I mean, there's inner gods, outer gods, elder gods, older gods. Right, take
absolutely. Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that because, I mean, that description there, the formless, idiotic demiurge Ubbo-Sathla, that reminds me of Lovecraft's description of Azathoth.
Yes, absolutely.
Because he's the blind, formless, idiot god at the center of the universe. It's almost like Ubbo-Sathla is the terrestrial version of Azathoth.
Very true. Yeah, because Ubbo-Sathla creates everything or life on Earth, but without any thought. There's no plan, right? It's that we're the yeast infection, right?
Yeah.
And Azathoth creates the whole universe, including Ubbo-Sathla, perhaps.
Indeed.
Just as part of an idiotic dream.
Yes. Yeah.
Again,
this is nuclear chaos. Yeah.
Yeah. This is the cosmicism, right? Because we've got the cosmic time element. We're going back millions and millions and millions of years, but we've also got that sense of huge scales of space as well, because if Ubbo-Sathla created something, what created Ubbo-Sathla? Well, must have been Azathoth then.
Yeah.
So in that sense, is he almost like an avatar of Azathoth?
Yeah, or spawn, or I don't know, an aspect. Yeah, just a piece of Azathoth. I don't know. Yeah.
We need to get hold of those stones and find out.
We do. Yeah, because apparently only by means of the crystal could he hope to find and read the tablets. So it's almost like the Rosetta Stone kind of thing.
Yeah. And isn't this, again, that lovely Jamesian thing, isn't it, of a seeker after knowledge? In effect, these people are scholars, and they're going to delve into the unknown. They're going to blow the whistle. They're going to dig up the crown. They're going to take the book down and read it. Pandora's box.
Yeah, precisely.
This is like a double trip now, right? Because we've had Tregarda's going back to Mythos, and now we get Zon going back to Ubbo-Sathla, or at least approaching that. And again, it's one of these Smithian transportation scenes that happen quite a lot. But again, they're always different. And we spoke about the mechanisms before, but the descriptions are all very different as well.
Yes.
The crystal appeared to swell and deepen, and in its filmy depth he beheld a swift and broken swirling of dim scenes, fleeting like the bubbles of a mill race. As if he looked upon an actual world, cities, forests, mountains, seas and meadows flowed beneath him, lightening and darkening as with the passage of days and nights in some weirdly accelerated stream of time. Zon Mezamalek had forgotten Paul Tregarda, had lost the remembrance of his own entity and his own surroundings in Mythos. Moment by moment, the flowing vision in the crystal became more definite and distinct, and the orb itself deepened till he grew giddy, as if he were peering from an insecure height into some never-fathomed abyss. I've got to say, that brings to mind the Time Machine, right? The 60s film, was that colour one?
Yeah.
Where the sped up day and night and all that, and it gets it accelerates faster and faster.
Yeah. You got that brilliant use of hand cranking on the camera, don't you? It's really well done.
That's a great film. We should cover that sometime on IBC, the story and the film, perhaps.
Yeah.
So he undergoes this journey, but he's able to return, and in fact, we return all the way back to Tregarda. And I thought this was interesting because it's like a regression, but he regresses to the future. which I thought, did that remind me of a film, perhaps? Regress to the Future or something? I'm not sure. Maybe. I can't quite remember.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I like it of the implication that it's all a circle. It brings to mind that brilliant quote from True Detective, season 1, time is a flat circle.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. And there's a great line here, right? I'm sure you picked up on this one as well. It had left him in the sort of psychic muddlement that follows a debauch of hashish. A debauch of hashish. Commonly known as having a spliff.
Yes, indeed.
A debauch, that's interesting, isn't it?
I like that. Yeah, a debauch of hashish.
Yeah, I suppose that was of the time, right? Reefer madness and all that sort of stuff. You know,
oh, yeah.
Would have been in the air, wouldn't it? So
especially in California.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. And he ends up almost in this dream state. We're back to that Chuang Tzu story of the man who dreamt he was a butterfly, or was he a butterfly dreaming that he was a man? Again, something that, well, we see in the Hounds of Tindalos and all these, another common theme in these stories. So his grip on reality is loosened a little bit. And I think that scares him off the crystal for a while. But it's almost like now it's become an addiction for him, and he has to go back to it.
Yeah, there's a lovely little line here. The very walls seemed to waver like smoke. The people in the streets were phantoms of phantoms, and he himself was a lost shadow, a wandering echo of something long forgot.
Nice.
It's nice, isn't it? I like that, phantoms of phantoms.
Yeah.
It's like after images kind of thing.
Yeah, like a double shadow.
Yes.
Yeah, there's something quite sort of wistful about that, isn't it? It's almost like the memory of a ghost, isn't it, or something?
Yeah.
Even the ghost has gone. There's just the memory of it. There's just a phantom of a phantom.
Yeah. It's Smith showing his poetry again. That's an incredibly poetic line, isn't it?
So this is where we now get the main trip, where we get the big journey all the way back. There came at last the day when he sat down before the crystal and did not return as Paul Tragardis. It was the day when Zon Mezamalek, boldly disregarding certain evil and portentous warnings, resolved to overcome his curious fear of falling bodily into the visionary world that he beheld. So, is this the decision of Tragardis, or is it the decision of Zon? Is it Zon making the decision, and because there's this link with Tragardis, he's now pulled in as well? That's why he can't turn away from the crystal.
Yeah.
You know, it's an interesting sort of chicken and egg thing, isn't it, really, I suppose?
Yeah. Don't think about it too hard, it'll give you a nosebleed.
As long as it's not yeasty, I don't know. And we're in the full-on past lives regression flashback into devolution. He seemed to live unnumbered lives, to die myriad deaths, forgetting each time the death and life that had gone before. He fought as a warrior in half-legendary battles. He was a child playing in the ruins of some olden city of Muthulan. He was the king who had reigned when the city was in its prime, the prophet who had foretold its building and its doom. A woman, he wept for the bygone dead in necropoli long crumbled. An antique wizard, he muttered the rude spells of earlier sorcery. A priest of some pre-human god, he wielded the sacrificial knife in cave tempers of pillared basalt. Life by life, era by era, he retraced the long and groping cycles through which Hyperborea had risen from savagery to high civilization.
Yeah, this is definitely where you can feel the Robert E. Howard creeping in, isn't it?
Yes, well, I can't remember off the top of my head when it was written, but one of the main scenes in People of the Black Circle is where the Devi, the Princess Yasmina, is captured by the seers of Yimshar, and the master sort of puts her into a hypnotic trance, I guess, and regresses her through all her past lives. So yeah, very similar feel. And again, she goes all the way back through, you know, the pain of death, the pain of childbirth. She's a man, she's a woman, all the way back to the primordial sludge, pretty much. And it's like a form of sort of mind washing in a way. It's like erasing the person's identity. You know, when you read about things, and again, we're in conspiracy territory here, of things like Operation Monarch and MK Ultra,
MK
and all these things, very much that almost erasing a person's personality to imprint something else on. So that's what I say within this. There seems to be the seeds of a lot of these modern conspiracy theories in this early fiction.
Yeah, and the concept of tabula rasa as well. The blank slate, which was used a lot by people like Philip K. Dick and those cyberpunk guys, Gibson and people like that used that quite a lot, didn't they? The wiping the memory and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's like you control delete pretty much, isn't it? Rewrite the program,
Exactly.
I mean, Robert Anton Wilson talked about that a lot, reprogramming yourself.
Indeed.
And I think him and Leary even come up with, there were like 8 neural circuits, I think. And it was how you progress, from the basic instincts all the way up to, getting out into space and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then we get what I think must be a complete nod to Two Gun Bob. At length, after eons of immemorial brutehood, it became one of the lost serpent men who reared their cities in the black gneiss and fought their venomous wars in the world's first continent. It walked undulously in ante-human streets, in strange crooked vaults. It peered at primeval stars from high Babylonian towers. It bowed with hissing litanies to great serpent idols. Through years and ages of the Ophidian era it returned, and was a thing that crawled in the ooze that had not yet learned to think and dream and build. So we're back to that very Howardian idea of the pre-human civilization, which of course he uses as a background to his Cole stories, the Shadow Kingdom, where the serpent men are trying to take over Valusia, which, as we have mentioned before, seems to have informed a number of modern-day conspiracists who like to think of our rulers as lizard people and all the rest of it.
I mean, that's been around for a long time, right? Because I remember as a kid, people were talking about the royal family being lizards,
You've only got to look at the Queen's name, surely. Dead giveaway.
Liz.
I mean, they hide it in plain sight, man. I mean, it's all just there, man.
Oh, brilliant.
And it is fascinating to me. As I say, I think it would be a very interesting episode to do. There's a guy whose podcast I listen to. I won't mention at the moment, but be interesting to have a chat with him. He's very up on his conspiracy theories in how can I put this, a scholarly way. So tracing the roots of these and everything else. And certainly a lot of it points back to this time with Blavatsky and the Hidden Masters and the root races. And then we move into this 1920s, 30s era with the serpent people and the ideas of, aliens in charge and all that kind of stuff, It's interesting to see that what started as fiction, at least as far as Lovecraft and co were concerned, seems to have formed the root for this huge growth in the conspirasphere.
Yeah, it's strange how it's all becoming mainstream. I saw the other day that there was actually an actual debate in the Republican House. They had like a committee, a kind of sit-down thing, and it was chaired by Lauren Boebert, who's a Republican from Colorado, right? And it was about apparently the Pentagon hiding or suppressing information about an alien civilization in the sea.
Wow. So that's at the top tier of...
That was government, right?
Of government, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I thought it was a parody when I first saw it, but apparently not.
It's hard to tell what's parody and what's real these days.
Exactly.
Is it hyper-reality? I think some people call it. I suppose in a sense it's no different. We were talking about the Thule Society earlier.
No.
I mean, that was part of the ideology, of that particular political group.
Yeah.
Founded on a load of old bollocks. That's an English technical term for our listeners.
A load of old bollocks. Yeah.
And yet, in the wrong hands, it's very dangerous.
Oh yeah. Well, you only have to look at QAnon, don't you, to see how dangerous it can be.
Yes, quite. So that's basically the end of the story. Tragardis has gone back via Zon, who's gone back via these countless lives, human lives, beast man lives, into the serpent men, and then, of course, into the primal forms of existence before them. And the time came when there was no longer a continent, but only a vast chaotic marsh, a sea of slime without limit or horizon, without shore or elevation, that seethed with a blind writhing of amorphous vapours. There, in the grey beginning of earth, the formless mass that was Ubbo-Sathla reposed amid the slime and the vapours. And there, to the goal of a forgotten search, was drawn the thing that had been, or would sometime be, Poltergeist and Zon Mezamelech. Becoming a shapeless eft of the prime, it crawled sluggishly and obliviously across the fallen tablets of the gods, and fought and ravened blindly with the other spawn of Ubbo-Sathla. So it's kind of a shame, isn't it? Because he found those tablets, but it's just a formless, mindless thing now.
Protoplasmic blob. Yeah. No.
So it's a case of, again, be careful what you wish for, I think.
Yeah. We got a nice little description of Ubbo-Sathla itself here. Headless, without organs or members, it sloughed from its oozy sides in a slow, ceaseless wave the amoebic forms that were the archetypes of earthly life. Horrible it was, if there had been aught to apprehend the horror, and loathsome, if there had been any to feel loathing. Nice.
It's just an existence, basically, isn't it? And you've got to think, again, I don't know where science exactly was at the time in terms of amoebas and cells, and I mean, microscopes have been around for a while, yeah, but it almost feels like, in a sense, that Lovecraftian thing of you look outward to space for aliens, but if you look inward at the microscope, or under the sea, heaven forbid, that's where the true horror is.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting because basically Ubbo-Sathla is the primordial ooze, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's, that just explains the whole thing. It wasn't some random chain reaction of amino acids and things like that kick-started life. It was the formless blob from beyond the stars.
Yeah. And from the religious perspective at the time, this would have been extremely blasphemous, right?
Oh, God, yeah. Thinking about that, it would, wouldn't it?
Yeah, there's no 7 days here, right? First of all, we've got these incredible lengths of time, these eons and millions and billions of years. But the acts of creation itself, life just arises out of itself. There's no architect. There's no meaning. There's no plan. It's just chaos. And it just happened that we turned out the way we did.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of that, isn't it? It's I wonder, has there ever been because we've talked about satanic panic and things like that before. Have Christian groups ever gone after people like Lovecraft and Smith and people like that?
I imagine if they did, they would lump him in with the satanic panic or with the Satanism. Yeah. They'd say you've got people in these stories summoning demons, and I mean, and certainly we know they used those trappings, right? Both Smith and Lovecraft, and Howard. There's often a scene with some sort of ritual going on and evocation and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But there's nothing Christian about it, is there? In the sense of no one's trying to summon up the devil.
Yeah.
You're trying to summon. Again, we get into that thing. Is it horror or science fiction? Because Azathoth is a sci-fi concept in a lot of ways.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, the one in all and all in one. It's basically a load of iridescent spheres beyond time and space. Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, so it has that cosmic element as opposed to, I don't know what you'd call it, the sort of idea of heaven and hell is kind of cosmic, but it seems very particular to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How does that fit in with the whole universe? Whereas you can almost more easily imagine nuclear chaos at the centre of everything because it all seems so bloody random.
Yeah, but that's actually something I thought about when I was a kid. Because it was like other planets, right? And I've always thought that the amount of stars and solar systems, there's got to be life out there somewhere, right? Do people on them or the creatures on them go to the same heaven and hell that people at Earth do? Or does God have a specific heaven and hell for each planet?
There you go. That's the question, isn't it?
Isn't it?
That's the question. And, maybe one day, if we do ever meet those life forms, it would be very interesting to see. I mean, we can look at comparative religions on Earth, right? So every society goes through pretty much the same experience. There's differences in how religion might be approached in terms of ritual or whatever. But it generally starts with a creation story.
Yeah. There's always a flood.
Yeah, the flood is universal.
Yeah.
It seems to be a universal thing. So again, this is the great thing with these stories, right? It's on the one hand, it's a simple pulp story about a guy who looks into a magic crystal and turns into a blob. I mean, that's the pitch. That's the elevator pitch. I've got this great idea for a film. Mr. Spielberg, bloke gets a crystal, looks into it, turns into a blob. Yeah, thanks. Okay. But,
it's tickled me that.
You can reduce anything down to that.
Yeah.
What was that thing? What was Star Wars? It's the space hairdresser and his friend that looks like a dog or something. Find a magic sword and
yeah. Reductio ad absurdum.
Yes. But once you start looking into all these little offshoots and what these guys were drawing on, I think it reveals a lot of depth.
Yeah.
And of course, we know what Lovecraft's view of religion was. I'm a little less clear of Smith. He certainly wasn't religious in the sense of being a practicing. I don't think he wasn't a churchgoer or anything. But I don't know, did he have more of a spiritual aspect to him than Lovecraft, perhaps, who was just an out-and-out materialist?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's why I always find Derleth's perspective quite fascinating, because obviously he was Catholic, wasn't he?
Mm.
So, yeah, and that's why you get more of that good versus evil stuff in his work, which is his take on it.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating how different they all were in the circle in their own little ways and idiosyncrasies.
Yes, and yet they're all able to cross-reference each other and sort of get on as well. It's a shame in a way, as we said before, in some sense, that they didn't all meet up and perhaps work together on something. Some sort of collaboration would have been very interesting to see the results of that.
Yeah, I think the nearest we got was the challenge from Beyond, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The round robin.
The round robin, yeah. So that's basically the end of the story. The last paragraph just tells us, of course, that of Zon Mazamalek and his vanishing, there is no mention anywhere, save the brief passage in the Book of Eibon. Concerning Paul Tragardis, who also disappeared, there was a curt notice in several of the London papers. No one seems to have known anything about him. He is gone as if he had never been, and the crystal presumably is gone too. At least, no one has found it. And there's a sort of implied yet there, isn't there?
There's an implied ellipses at the end, isn't there? Dot, dot, dot. Yeah, I like to think that the crystal's turned back up in the curio shop waiting for some other poor sod to come and get it. That's what I like to think,
Of course, makes you wonder who the shop owner is now.
Exactly.
Doesn't it?
Especially as he was quite a sinister chap in a way. He was a little bit furtive.
Yeah, you can almost see a Nyarlathotep-ish kind of tendency there, or again that Avatar or something.
Yeah, kind of similar to Stephen King's Needful Things and things like that.
So I believe we've got just a couple of short letter extracts on this. I think one from Weird Tales and one from Dawnwood Spire, Lonely Hill.
Indeed, yeah. The one from Weird Tales is an interesting one, because I'm just going to read you this paragraph in full here. In a letter to the Erie, Robert Block of Milwaukee says in part, "Your new issue is superb, the best in some time. Lovecraft scores heavily. Yes, sir, Grandpa Cthulhu's new story takes the cake. Real writing, real background, real horror. Second place goes, of course, to Clark Ashton Smith. His infusion of colour into prosaic plots is true literary achievement." Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, so there you go. Mr. Bobby Block was a fan.
I just find it great. I still find it great that you got. I mean, in our eyes, Robert Block is a towering figure in the modern horror genre, and there he is writing a fan letter at the age of 17 or something.
I find these fascinating. We're going through here because you get people who were actually quite big at the time cropping up. in them. I mean, you'll get letters from Derleth and Smith and Lovecraft all popping up in the letters section of Weird Tales. I mean, in this very issue, there's also a letter from Dwayne Rimmel, who was one of Lovecraft's revision guys.
Yeah. So yeah, Dawnwood Spire, we get some mentions of it, but really it's just those one-liners again about, oh, writers rejected this, or the. So we get this from Lovecraft, and it really just reinforces what you mentioned at the start with the publication history. But, of course, as ever, this being Dawnwood Spire, Lonely Hill, we have the return address. So, if you would indulge me. Rock Desert of Ying on transgalactic Yadith, before the bronze cliff gate around which lie the fetid bodies and immemorial bones of nameless beasts. Hour of the opening of the gate. Dear Clark Ashton.
That's brilliant. That's one of my favourites so far, that.
The Rock Desert of Ying.
Rock Desert of Ying. I love it.
The changes in the seed sound decidedly interesting, and I hope Clayton will take it in its present form. It was just as well, I fancy, not to adopt the radical and elaborate changes suggested by Monsieur le Comte d'Erlette. By this time you will have received my enthusiastic opinion of Ubbo-Sathla, which confirms the independent judgment of d'Erlette. And to think Brother Farnsworth has turned this down, I give him up. My peace of mind demands that I let him alone for a while. So Lovecraft was so annoyed he didn't want to even talk to the guy for a while.
But he did. Evidently he did. He gave him a bollocking by all account.
Last episode, as you may remember, we covered the second interment, and we're pleased to say we've had some comments in on that, starting with our friend Mark Griffin of 30 Plus Minutes with H.P. Lovecraft podcast.
The manumission of your infrangible podcast is always a welcomed promulgation into the scientific fiction of the quasi-immortal Averoignian prophet Clark Ashton. Nice. Since you mentioned the Serpent and the Rainbow movie in the last episode, I recommend reading The Basis by Wade Davis. The Wes Craven-directed pick took many liberties, most notably the Davis surrogate being buried alive. Some of the facts in the book have been disputed, but it's still a great non-fiction study into the zombie culture of Haiti and other places. Yeah, I totally agree. I've actually got a copy of that because I tracked it down after I first watched The Serpent and the Rainbow. What's it called? Is it called The Mysterious Island or something like that? Or The Magic Island? I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head. Right. But yeah, it's a great book.
Excellent, thank you for that, Mark. Yes, I'm going to be. I'll be checking that out as well. Yeah, and I'll probably watch the film again because it's been quite a few years since I watched that. We've had some comments in on YouTube as well. Valzane Lumivix writes. Now, you might remember last episode we were talking about Magbane. The name of the main character was Magbane, and I found that little scientific extract. Well, we have some more information from Valzane. Regarding the Magbane, Magbane is the name given to a certain mutant strain of paramecium, a single-celled organism of the phylum Protozoa that's susceptible to magnesium ions, which means that when a magnesium salt is added into a culture of said strain of paramecium, the growth of the organism is slowed and ultimately stopped. The article goes on to describe methods of isolation of such magnesium-susceptible strains and its difference in behaviour to that of magnesium-resistant strains, and discusses possible reasons for said variation. Also, Mg2 squared, which I think is what I called it, is pronounced Mg2 plus, meaning magnesium with a net 2 plus charge due to loss of 2 electrons. Well, that certainly cleared it up for me. But thank you for that. Thank you for that. I can read through that and I get some idea about what's going on there in my poor non-scientific brain. But thank you. It's I wonder where the name Magbane came from that. Was there a Smith reader? That might be an interesting thing to find out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, spelt Magbane. Yes.
Valzane also adds, I don't know if it's me, but I found this story, to use one of Smith's favourite words, mundane. But I liked your discussion and analysis. Well, thank you very much for that. And thanks for writing in. I think, in a sense, it is mundane in that Smith was writing this pretty much to order, right?
Yes. Yeah.
it wasn't something that sprang from his fertile imagination as such as a plotline suggested to him. A bit like, what was the one with the competition winner sent in the plot idea?
Oh yeah,
The Mars story.
Yeah, it was a Mars story. Yeah. Next up, we have one from Rick Kennett. Smith uses catalepsy again, and to great effect in The Charnel God, a story you're yet to get to. Yes, one I'm looking forward to, actually.
Oh yes, Mordigian. That's one of my favourites, actually. That one.
Absolutely,
yeah.
The Great Ghoul. Yeah.
Yes. And our old friend Black Cavalier, aka Niels, our Auburn correspondent, sent in this message. Speaking of the real world getting into your dreams, I just had a nightmare where a monster was sucking my breath and my scream out. The more terrified I got, the more I screamed, and the harder I screamed, the harder it sucked, until I finally couldn't breathe at all. I woke up and found my sleep apnea mask blocking my nose.
Well, that's like the traditional thing of the hag, isn't it? Sitting on your chest and all that. And
the night terrors.
So,
yeah, scary stuff. Thank you, Niels.
Yeah, and thanks to everybody else who sent in correspondence. Keep it coming, and we will try our best to get them on the show.
Now, we did mention Averoigne earlier with our Gaspard du Nord, and I just wanted to mention before we go that I've recently had the fortune to be in France on a work-related matter, and while I was there, I got the opportunity to have a brief sojourn in Averoigne, and very nice it was too. I'm glad to say it all went well. I didn't see any pan-like creatures. I wasn't assailed by vampires or anything like that. But did see some very interesting places. I was taken up onto one of the highest sort of hills in the area to an old medieval town that I thought could have stood in for Malmaison. Little winding cobbled streets, steep buildings on each side, medieval church, the whole thing. I think the place was called Tour. I think it's Tourtour.
Nice.
So if you're ever in that area around Nice, do have a look out for that. I've put some pictures up. I'll put a link to those below on my Facebook page, so you can see some of the sights from there. Now, one of the most alarming and strange sights was walking through the town square, and I looked up, and there was an iron sculpture on a plinth. Now, the plinth was about 6 foot high, and the sculpture was about 6 foot high, of what I can only describe as a Migo. When you see the pictures, you'll see what I mean.
Yeah.
And
I was going to ask you about the Migo.
Yeah. I said to my friend who'd taken me there, what the fuck is that? There are two of these things. And he said, oh, these are local insects. I think there was some sort of silk trade going on there or something like that in times gone by. So I'm guessing these are the sort of creatures that produce this silk, maybe. But yes, two large metal sculptures, and I said to him, oh, are they life size? And he sort of looked at me like, writer's brain. Right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
But what a totally strange and unexpected thing to see. You're looking at a sort of medieval fountain at one moment, and then there's these two Migo creatures. Brilliant.
Yeah.
The other thing, when we were driving out of the town that got a funny look, actually he laughed at this one, was we went past a restaurant and the sign outside said whatever the name of the restaurant, and underneath it said human restaurant. So I said, is there some sort of cannibal cult? And again he gave me a funny look. This is the writer's brain again, right? Human restaurant. Like, you think you go to a fish restaurant, they serve
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Long pig.
Yeah. So, well, who knows? Again, perhaps it's putting it right out in the open,
There you go, hiding in plain sight. Yeah.
I didn't go in. I didn't even stop to get a picture. I certainly wasn't going in there. I've seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre and those films,
Yeah, you know how it ends. Yeah.
I know what happens in these countryside places, especially when it says human restaurant. All right, well, that's it for today. Thanks, folks, for joining us. As always, please do send in your comments, questions and suggestions. Thanks very much to everyone who's written in, and thanks, of course, to all our subscribers on YouTube and on Patreon. If you'd like to join our merry growing band, and help support the show, check out our Patreon page. You can sign up at 3 tiers. You get access to all our bonus content. And of course, you get regular copies of Innsmouth news and various other items as well. So I believe we've already mentioned our next story.
Indeed. Yeah, next time around, we're going to be looking at The Double Shadow.
It's another classic.
It is. It is.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to reading that. Hope you can join us next time. But for now, it's goodbye from me, Rob Poynton.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.